Hi, welcome to the second video on the mind of Christ. This video is part of a series that we're using to explore how Paul tells the Philippians how to live in missional community together, how to live together, not just for each other, but with Jesus, and not just like we're all with Jesus, but also in a way that can proceed to heal the world. In the last video, we saw how the mind of Christ isn't just the way Jesus arbitrarily thinks about himself, but it's a discussion for Paul where Paul deconstructs the major narrative, the major story about influence in the Greco-Roman cultural setting. He says this is how the acquisition of influence is done by you people, but I'm telling you to do it differently. I'm telling you that this story that you didn't even know you had in your heads, you got to get it out of your heads. It's not a good story. You can only think thoughts along those tracks. You need different tracks. Let me give you different tracks. Here's how Jesus thinks. Here's how Jesus wields influence. And he gives them a competing story that they can now choose to live in. That last video was pretty heady, pretty ethereal, pretty abstract. This one's going to be a little more concrete. We're going to go through the same material, Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, and a little bit of 4:1. And we're going to do it two ways. One, we're going to look at the verbs from 5 through 8, the verbs, the things Jesus did. And then we're going to look at some of the practical, concrete things Paul says to do. And at the end of this, you should be able to kind of step into inhabiting the mind of Christ a little bit more concretely than you could at the end of the last video. So this is just me restating the verbs from 5 through 8, verses 5 through 8. If you haven't read chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, do that now. So even though he was in the form of God, he didn't count equality with God something he needed to cling to grasp with his knuckles like this. He let it go. If you want to influence like Jesus, you're going to have to not try to gain or keep control. This one's a hard one for me. I've been in the Jesus way for a long time, and anymore, I don't really struggle with trying to control people just to make me happy so much. I don't really do a lot of that. I know when my heart wants that, but I want their freedom more than I want my safety, so I can release them. But when I see people that I love about to make some mistakes or taking a path that I think is bad and I give them advice and they don't follow it, I still find it challenging not to grab hold of them. Not even with my fists, but just not to try to stay in their head and help them think differently because I'm real worried about what's going to happen to them. And so I try to control what happens to them, and I'm tempted to control them to prevent a bad thing happening. But that's not a way to influence like Jesus. You can't do that, right? So I'm still learning. I'm in this journey of learning how to release control because I want to influence like Jesus. There are a lot of ways that you can try to control things. You can use humor to control how close people get. You've done this, right? You've used jokes and used your stories and used your anecdotes and your funny one-liners to control how close people, how much of your actual heart people can see, how much people could hurt you if they got close enough. You control that. You control the room with your story or with your silence. You try to mitigate what happens to you by the way you inhabit a party or inhabit get together with your friends or inhabit a team meeting. Or you enter a conversation and try to control the floor using the way you shape your words or the volume of your voice or your body language. You try to control where that conversation goes. These aren't terrible, horrible things. They're just things that have to be abandoned if you want to wield power like Jesus. And I don't just mean power. I mean, if you want to contribute to a community the way Jesus would contribute to your community, you're going to have to abandon control. Not considering status, up or in, as a goal. Some of you are you're like climbers, right? Got to be valedictorian. Got to get in the best schools. Got to be the top of my field. That is good. Ambition that way is good. And being a slacker is not. Being an underachiever and calling it good is under. Achievement is not. It's not good. Being an overachiever also isn't awesome. Desiring to do the best that you can because God gave you good gifts, that's good. Desiring to be the best, so that there's no one on top of you. You are above all. That's probably the same motivation that got Satan in trouble in the first place. Not your friend, that thing in your heart. But there's also the desire for in status, not just up status, but in status. You know this, the desire to be not excluded. The fear of being left out is a disease in many cultures now. We just want to make sure we're in. We will push others out to be in. We won't push them, but we'll just like turn our back on them to make sure we're facing in, even if that means they're out. The desire for status is the opposite of making yourself of no reputation. The desire to be viewed as awesome, the desire to be viewed is the opposite of making yourself of no reputation. Okay? You can't go both ways. Humbling ourselves before others have to humble us. Becoming obedient. I've been leading, and I've been developing leaders for a long time now. The number one thing that I want from someone is the ability to obey. Now that doesn't mean that they're passive. Passive people are not helpful. I don't need people who just won't rebel. I need people who will do things, who will do what we ask them to. If they'll do what we ask them to, even if they're not sure they agree, if it's not a moral issue, if they're not sure that that's what they would do, if they can be trusted to follow, then they might be able to be trusted to lead. If you can't obey, your influence is dangerous. If you can't obey humans, your influence is dangerous, and it's not helpful to the community. Imagine a leadership development program that focused on obedience as a number one skill. That'd be a world changer. Embrace being misunderstood or ignored. We don't like this. He died, not just died. He died not a martyr, not a hero, but a criminal. He died on a cross. We don't like this at all. We are not fans of this. We use different language. Embrace being trolled, unliked, unviewed, slandered, having shade thrown on you. Embrace that. Embrace that as okay, as something you don't need to avoid and that you shouldn't try to control. We really hate this. Like the social media generation, we hate this. We are constantly throwing stuff up on the internet about ourselves, right? Because we don't want to be ignored. We want to be seen. Let's see if anybody saw what I said about me, right? And then, and we don't, it's like, look at my feet, look at my shoes, check out what I ate today. I saw this bumper sticker, right? Me, my stuff. And then but no one's going like, check out how I yelled at my kids. Here's this cool, terrible thing I said to my mother because I'm a jerk. Nobody's throwing that stuff up there, right? Nobody doing that. Because we want to be understood the way we want to be understood. So we don't want to be misunderstood and we don't want to be ignored. Just we want to be seen as we want to be seen. You can't fuel that hunger and influence like Jesus at the same time. You just can't. You just got to let go of how people are going to talk about you. You have to like follow Jesus outside the camp, outside the gates, where people malign you and say terrible things about you and misunderstand you and don't write books about how awesome you are. It's going to have to be the way it is. If that's okay with you, then maybe you can be trusted to influence the community you're part of. All right. Practical handles, concrete stuff. Seek one mind, and that's his mind. Here's what I mean. In chapter 2, verse 1, Paul says, here are these signs of life you've got. And then in verse 2, he says, that's not enough, though. I want you to be of one mind, one heart, one love, one. And when I teach this, the feedback I get, when I teach the 1 stuff, the one love stuff, same mind, think one thing. Like even to the Corinthians, he writes, I want all of you to come to exactly the same opinion on everything. Right? Exactly the same opinion on everything. Number one, Americans hate that. Like we really reserve our right to think whatever I want and to be different in the way I think what I want, right? Paul writes this, and I'll teach it, and the feedback I get is, well, sometimes we just gotta agree to disagree. Sometimes we just gotta agree to disagree. All right, well, Paul says, seek one mind. But then he says in 4:1, I beseech Euodia and I beseech Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. If I and a ministry partner, I and my wife, I and my teammate, I and a friend, radically disagree about something important, not like, well, I think that it's important to drive slowly to save your tires, and I don't, right? Then not that. If we're disagreeing about something that's important, like that's going to inform a decision, that it's something inside the community that we need to like figure out because the community needs to take an action. You know who else has an opinion on it? Jesus. So what if our job isn't to push our point? What if our job is to let our point sit and take our hands off our point, stop controlling the outcome of the conversation, and just say, hey, Jesus, we're both here to find out what you want. And then we'll do that. So what we'll get is Jesus' opinion on this. And that's not his opinion on all things like it. We don't need to write a policy then. We don't need to make a rule like forever and always, Jesus only drives this way. But we can say that right now Jesus said this and we're going to obey. We're going to obey. He thought this and I thought that and Jesus said this other thing. Or Jesus agreed with him or Jesus agreed with me. That doesn't matter who was right. It matters that we heard and now we can obey. That's how you come to one mind. You stop trying to be right, try to be obedient. Let nothing be done for strife or vainglory. Those are kind of hard words. Let nothing be done in order to win. Let nothing be done in order to gain juice, to gain respect, to become more important, to advance you. Self-advancement, it can't be a goal. And so it's not just don't make it a goal. Everyone kind of advances themselves, but let's make sure we're also, looking out for people. Let zero things be done. Here's how you do that. When you find yourself driven to put yourself forward, to put yourself first, to make sure people think you're awesome, or make sure people don't think you're bad, don't think bad things about you. When you find yourself motivated to control how people think about you, or when you find yourself motivated to put your best foot forward in your relationships in your community, just don't act. It doesn't say let all things be done through something else. It just says let nothing be done through those motives. It's just the simplest thing in the universe to pull off. Ready? You just don't. When you feel yourself driven to fight with somebody, to win this conversation, just shut up. And when you find yourself driven to control an argument within your community and to make sure your side wins, just shut up. Just don't act. Just take a nap. Go get an ice cream. You find yourself driven to push yourself forward, or to, you meet someone and you're like, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I blah, 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 me, blah, blah, me. When you want to do that, hi, I'm so-and-so, and that's your name, and that's it. And that's all they need. And you smile. And you decide you're going to be more interested in what they say next than in how they heard you. Let nothing be done. Just do nothing when you're motivated that way. Consider others as more important than yourself. Say this to you once clearly. It's not because you're not important. You're really important to Jesus. You're so important to Jesus. He's omnipotent and brilliant. He can handle taking care of you. You're so important to him. And since you're so confident about that, you don't need to be important to you. You put others before you. And that way, if Jesus is taking care of you and you got someone in front of you, Jesus is taking care of both of you now. That's great. This isn't you consider others better because you think you're crap. It's you consider others more important because you know you're loved. And because this is how Jesus do. But imagine if we did this as communities. Imagine if if a budget item in every fellowship in your city was, we're going to give 10% to the success of other fellowships in our city. Doesn't matter what people give, 10% of it goes to other churches in the city. If they look not only to their own interests, but also the interests of the other fellowships. The team I'm part of, we are actively seeking to figure out. We're loaning personnel out and giving our personnel's time to other teams. A line item in our strategy is see to the success of other teams in the city. That shouldn't be a weird thing. That should be a line item in every team's agenda, is make sure the rest of the teams also succeed. Don't seek exaltation through dissent. This is the martyr's path, and you can't be a martyr if you want to follow Jesus. Don't try to dive down deep and fight for bottom so that you'll wind up on top. Fight for bottom to make sure the community is well, and let God put you where God thinks you belong. All right? Grace to you and peace. Fight for the bottom.